Hey, I'm Sam. Welcome to Brickwall Unplugged. Today I'm doing a long-awaited David Cronenberg tier list. This one has been a very long time in the works. I want it to be extremely thorough with Cronenberg. And he has a few films that can be quite hard to find. I managed to track down all of his feature films. He does have one other, technically, called Fast Company or whatever, but I don't think that one really counts. He had nothing to do with the script. It was just a director for hire gig. I don't know if he's like fully disowned it, but it's definitely not a like Cronenberg film. It's a movie that he just called action on, you know what I mean? But we've got all of his other feature films here, and there's also a little short film here that I included because it's one of his early formative works. We've also got his original Crimes of the Future and the new Crimes of the Future. We're going to get started here with The Brood. These are in a randomized order, as always. The Brood is from Cronenberg's 1970s period. It might be his best of the 70s, actually, because I think his real best are mostly from the 80s. And, he had some really good 90s stuff, too. There's a real progression into The Brood from his movies that came before it, like Shivers and Rabid. Those you can feel like he's still forming what the Cronenberg style and, like, the Cronenberg fixations are. It's like a light sketch of that in Shivers, and then it's starting to get a little more shaped in Rabid. And then by the time you're in The Brood, I think that's, like, fully Cronenberg now. This one feels like him through and through. Lots of really great stuff in there. Lots of good horror. The tiny like kids in the rain jackets that are killing people is a lot of fun. It's got the body horror, the grotesque like stomach stuff going on. The Brood's a fun one. Oliver Reed he gives a good performance in there. I think it's B tier in the grand scope of Cronenberg's filmography. Definitely worth watching. Okay, next up is Spider, which is so The Brood's pretty easy to find. Spider is not. Spider, you gotta like really hunt down a copy of if you want to watch it. And I'll be saying that about some of his other movies too. And it's not like it's super old or anything. Like it stars Ralph Fiennes. It's kind of a smaller, more indie kind of movie. Ralph Fiennes is fantastic in this. It's really a movie that's all about that main character and that central performance. And Ralph Fiennes has the goods to back it up. It's a really interesting main character. It's a story that isn't that interesting, though. It's an interesting character in a story that's kind of middling. It's a story that's pretty similar to lots of other stories about, like, mental illness, about a guy going crazy. It's told in a more obfuscated sort of way, where you're left, like, doubting what's real and what isn't. You're left sort of, like, confused at first about the perspective that we're seeing, because it kind of merges like memories with like present tense, like waking life kind of stuff, where he's kind of like walking into his own memories in an interesting way that's not like spelled out. There's a little bit of a mystery going on. It's not that complicated. It's the kind of movie where you're like deliberately confused at first, but it doesn't really remain a mystery throughout. You kind of get a grasp of what's going on partway through, and then you kind of go through the motions. It's a really good performance and a really good character, like I said. But and Cronenberg's filmmaking feels a little held back in certain regards in this one. Not in other ways. Like he's got really great like use of setting. Like the production design is really strong in this one. I think it's probably a C, but it's like a strong C. It's definitely closer to a B than a C, but I think it's a C. Still worth a watch for Cronenberg fans. I will say, despite like what the title and poster might make you think, it's not one of Cronenberg's horror movies. He did lots of horror, but he also did tons of non-horror. I feel like when people talk about Cronenberg, they tend to talk as if he was nothing but horror until he made A History of Violence and Eastern Promises, and then he like stopped doing horror. But that's not really true. He has non-horror movies scattered all throughout his career, and Spider's one of them, despite what it kind of looks like. And I think it being hard to find, it's easy for people to just assume that that's another horror movie, but it's not. It's more of a drama thriller. There's like some violence in it, but not much, and it's definitely not like scary or creepy, and there's no like body horror going on or anything. Okay, next up is The Dead Zone. This is probably one of his most famous. And it's one that I kind of like forget is a Cronenberg movie sometimes because it is so much like a Stephen King movie. And then, of course, you have the Dead Zone TV show later on. And it's interesting because, on the one hand, it doesn't seem like a movie that would become a TV show. But then, on the other hand, it absolutely does. Because structurally, the movie kind of feels like 3 episodes of a TV show. Even so, it's like a premise that doesn't feel like a TV premise, but the structure of the movie definitely feels like a TV show structure. But that structure does hurt it, I would say, because it ends up meaning that parts of the movie are more engaging than other parts, and it also means that it kind of feels like the movie's ending, and then you're only like part way through, and it's just like, oh, there's a different plot happening now. Like when it becomes the thing with like the senator or the mayor, or the politician, whoever he is, being assassinated, it's kind of like, this is like a completely different story. It just happens to still have the same main character in it. Christopher Walken's good in it. There's some fun practical effects going on, like when the room is on fire and the water in the fish bowl boils and bubbles out the top of it. That's a really fun, creative visual. I don't know. This one doesn't really do it so much for me. I think it's a C. Definitely worth a watch, at least once. Okay, next up is Dead Ringers. This is the first one that I can enthusiastically get behind. I'm going to pop it an A for right now. I could see this going all the way to S, but I'm going to put it an A for the time being. Dead Ringers is a really great one. I think it has one of Cronenberg's best screenplays in it. Jeremy Irons is fantastic in the 2 lead roles, playing these identical twin brothers. It is so good. It's one of the best actor playing 2 role performances that you'll see, I think. Like, you fully forget that it's the same guy in both roles. And it's helped in part by some really excellent special effects and like camera trickery to put them both in the same frame and have them interacting and stuff. You never for a second doubt it. It's not like like Twin Dragons where Jackie Chan's playing 2 people and it's like very clearly just Jackie Chan twice. It's not like that. It's very much like you'll forget you're watching the same guy. His performance is so distinctive. It's like, yeah, they're identical twins, but the personalities are completely different. And there's the whole like drug addiction angle. He sells that so well. And a lot of that's in the writing. Like I said, it's one of Cronenberg's best screenplays. It's just so sharp on both a character level and a thematic level. Like Cronenberg has always been great about theme in his work. I think it's one of the areas that he really excels, and one of the things that really elevates his brand of horror above lots of other horror where there's a less emphasis placed on theme, or maybe there's as much emphasis placed on it, but the auteur behind that theme doesn't have Cronenberg's grasp of. He's got like the perfect mix of subtlety but clarity. Like it's clear what he's trying to say, but he's never on the nose about it. And he manages to always work his themes directly into the body horror or into whatever like sci-fi component is at play. Always really great about that stuff. And Dead Ringers is just fantastically written. They turned it into a TV show recently, an Amazon Prime original series with Rachel Weisz playing the 2 leads. I watched the first episode of that and I thought it was pretty good, but I was still kind of like, why did this need to be made into a miniseries? it was okay, but I was like, I don't know what's the goal here of remaking it. I don't know. Dead Ringers is kind of like borderline horror. I would actually say that it's more of a drama about addiction, and then it just has some like a little bit of fucked up energy to it. Particularly in like the gynecological tools, like those like fucked up tools. That's so Cronenbergian, those tools, and that shit is definitely creepy. And it's really strong visually too. Like the like surgical gowns they wear are completely unrealistic. Obviously, like you would never wear a blood-colored suit in surgery because like obviously it's not real. That's fine. It's not trying to be real. I see people point to that as like a failing in the movie, like a cinema sin or whatever. Fuck that. It's artistic liberty being taken, and it pays off. It creates a really striking, memorable image. Okay, next up, I'm gonna grab this one. It's a little higher up. Is A Dangerous Method. This is one of the last ones I had to watch because, like I said, I wanted to get through all of his movies. And there were a couple that I was like not as interested in, and A Dangerous Method was one of them. The other one was Maps to the Stars, which I just had no interest in. I probably wouldn't have gotten to Maps to the Stars for like years if I wasn't, trying to get the tier list out. And probably the same with The Dangerous Method. It's just not really my kind of movie. It's kind of like a stuffy period drama. It's pretty well made, but it doesn't have much personality. It does feel very Cronenbergian in the subject matter, actually, like surprisingly so. But like the sexual side of Cronenberg, not the horror side, because there's always interesting and like non-normative sexual stuff going on in his movies, and A Dangerous Method has that pretty strongly. That's kind of like what it revolves around completely. And some of that works, but it also feels very vanilla for Cronenberg, for a movie that's all about like sexual therapy and whatnot, like at like the turn of the century or whatever. It feels like Cronenberg could push those ideas so much further and like do his Cronenberg thing. And it feels very like restrained to a fault, not restrained in like an elegant way. It feels like it's aiming to be a little more like heightened and elevated, and in aiming to do that, it ends up handicapping itself and coming up a little bit short in certain areas. The performances are good from Fassbender and Mortensen, of course. Keira Knightley, I don't know. She's taken a huge swing with this performance. Like, she's definitely not holding back. And I think she goes a little over the top. The movie feels very restrained. She does not feel restrained at all. She's going hard. It's just a little much. I kept waffling on whether her performance was working or not for me. It really did not work for me at first, and then she started to win me over a little bit, and then she lost me again, and back and forth, back and forth. Yeah, it doesn't dig deep enough into its subject to really make itself worthwhile and memorable. I think it's this is the first one that I'm tempted to go down to D, but I think it is still a C. I think it's just this like Dead Zone is like firmly in the middle of C. Spider's like halfway to B. Dangerous Method's halfway to D. So these three are like a little staircase of quality, but I do think that they all fall within the C parameters. Okay, next up is Scanners. Scanners is one of Cronenberg's classics. But to be honest, it doesn't fully work for me. Scanners, I think, has a couple of great moments, namely the big head explosion, which is excellent. It's so great. One of the best head explosions ever. Probably just the best head explosion ever as far as the practical effect is concerned. It looks so good every time you see it. And it's built up too well in the scene. Like, the editing really elevates it too, like the way it goes back and forth and the way that the scanner's mind powers are conveyed leading up to the explosion. It's just really great. And then the ending scanner battle is also great with all the big special effects showcase and all that. But outside of those two moments, the rest of the movie doesn't work so well for me. It's got a fun premise that, again, kind of feels like a TV show like The Dead Zone. I think there might have been a Scanners TV show. Oh, okay, so there wasn't a Scanners TV show, but there is one currently in development, announced in 2022. I mean, who knows if that'll actually happen? Because it was HBO, and this was probably before all the Max fuckery. But there were sequels to Scanners, not directed by Cronenberg. I don't think he had anything to do with the sequels. I haven't seen either of those, and I'm not really interested to, because this doesn't really work for me. The premise is kind of interesting, but it's also a little, cheesy. Feels cheesy, but not in the fun way that a cheesy thing can be fun. It feels cheesy in the just unintentional, not nailing the coolness or the intrigue that it's going for. The main character is not memorable at all to me, and I'm not crazy about his performance either. I think he's a little wooden. Michael Ironside is fun though. I love me some Michael Ironside. He's great. And he's the villain in this. He's not the main character or whatever, which I guess you might assume given that he's the one on the poster and all that. But he's the bad guy. Great tagline, by the way. 10 seconds, the pain begins. 15 seconds, you can't breathe. 20 seconds, you explode. Great poster, great tagline. It's actually kind of got two taglines because this one up here. I think this one might be a D. And on my scale, if you're new here, D is not bad. D is usually worth watching, but like with a caveat or with like really low expectations. It's only E and F that I'm like steer clear from. Okay, next up is Crimes of the Future, the new Crimes of the Future. This was Cronenberg's first movie in a long while. Actually, as a director, because interestingly enough, he started acting more and more, and he's a pretty good actor. I like him in Nightbreed, the Clive Barker horror movie Nightbreed, where Cronenberg's the serial killer. He's the best part of that movie by far, which isn't a great movie, so it's kind of easy to be the best part. So the new version of Crimes of the Future. A lot of people called it a remake of his first movie, but it's not really what it is. He has an older movie called Crimes of the Future, which is like a student film. The new Crimes of the Future is not a remake of that movie, like at all. It's not telling the same story. It doesn't have the same characters. It doesn't have the same themes or ideas. They're completely unrelated, except for the title and I guess for the fact that they're both like sci-fi and have like horror elements. I'll talk about the original Crimes of the Future later on, but just know they're completely separate. There's really like nothing tethering them together. Crimes of the Future was Cronenberg's big return after several years away from directing, but he came back with Crimes of the Future, and he came back with a bang. It's the Cronenbergiest Cronenberg movie, because he did kind of step away from horror for a long time, and from like specifically body horror and like the grossness. He went a little more, I don't know about mainstream, but he went a little more like, I don't know, a little less weird, I suppose is the best way to put it. But Crimes of the Future is him going full weird again. And I loved it. I was loving the entire movie up until the end, because I feel like it just doesn't have an ending. I feel like this movie is like missing an ending. He needs to do a part 2 to it. I don't know if he ever plans on doing a part 2, but the movie feels unfinished. There's like a bunch of little plot threads that don't go anywhere, and they don't have like any resolution. So not a satisfying way to wrap up the movie, but I think it's really excellent until then, especially on like a world building level. Like he crafts such a uniquely Cronenberg future, like with the chair that's moving Vigo around, and with the like cool performance art pieces with the guy with the ears and everything, and the way surgery's used and all that. It's just excellent up until then. So I think if it really stuck the landing, it would be higher up. But even with the bad ending or like lack of ending, I think it's still a strong B, because it's so great up until that point. Okay, next up is A History of Violence, which was kind of a turning point in his career, even though, like I said, he had been doing plenty of non-horror movies before then that people kind of gloss over sometimes. And you can still see, even though A History of Violence isn't a horror movie, you can still go, oh yeah, a horror director made this like action thriller, because it's so fucking gory. He brought like the practical effects gore from horror into an actiony context, like when like Ed Harris gets shot, it's like the goriest like chest eruption you'll ever see. And he's constantly just like, dislocating jaws and caving in noses and stuff. It's real violent. The downside of that is I don't think the action is actually good at all. I think it's very violent and it's entertaining in that regard, but it's not well choreographed. It's very much one of those action movies where the action hero guy slowly beats up one guy while everybody else just kind of like patiently waits their turn to get beaten up. And I don't know, that always pulls me completely out of the movie. The situation that he's in, it doesn't feel like he's getting out of them because he's this like super badass guy who like is better trained and more skilled. It doesn't feel like that. It feels like he gets out of these situations because the bad guys just wait their turn to get like mutilated. So that holds it back. Also, the mystery component is interesting, but I feel like it has a really cool idea at the heart of it, but it doesn't quite go all the way with that idea. It also just feels very generic and cliched up until that twist reveal. And when the twist happens, it gets more interesting. It gets more engaging. But it didn't need to be so, like, I like there being the red herring, the mislead of what the movie's about, but you can do that without just being so cliche and generic feeling. And that's what all the family drama is, like with their kid and with his wife. It's all just very bland. And the opening scene's interesting, like with the guys in the motel and all that. That works. But then just the next big stretch of the movie is just so generic and bland. And it's there for contrast. It serves an interesting purpose, but my point is that you can get that contrast. You can get everything that section is doing thematically while still being engaging and having compelling and less rote drama. And that holds it back for me. Again, not too much. It's still a C. It's still worth watching. I've seen this one a couple times, and every time I want to like it more than I do. Because it's, I don't know, most people like it. Most Cronenberg fans point to it as one of his best, but it just isn't for me. Okay, next up is Cosmopolis, which is a weird one. This is later stage Cronenberg. Kind of like, it's Cosmopolis and then Maps from the Stars, or Maps to the Stars. That's what it's called, right? To the Stars? Maps to the Stars, yeah. Those two are very much like, oh, this is odd. What are you doing here, Cronenberg? And then he took his big break, meaning long break. Oh, it's his big break, not the good kind of big break. Cosmopolis is weird. I think it's interesting to look back on or like to watch now because I saw it relatively recently, a couple years ago at this point, but long after it was released. And in retrospect, I was looking at like contemporary reviews for it, meaning contemporary of like when it was released, so not like now contemporary, whatever. Reviews from around the time it was released. Lots of people were, because this was like when R. Pats was like fresh off Twilight, and people thought he was just a bad actor at that point because he was only in those bad movies. And then later on, people learned, oh, he's great, actually. He's really good in like The Lighthouse and Good Time and whatnot. So I went into this being a fan of his, knowing that he is a really good actor with the right roles. He's also in Maps to the Stars. I think he's pretty good in both of those, but it's easy to see why people can watch Cosmopolis and think he's a bad actor because it's a very weird movie, but his performance fits the weird world of this movie. I wouldn't say he's like great in it, but I don't think he's bad. I think he is doing what's asked of him. But what's being asked of him is very weird, very off-kilter. It's adapted from a book that I think is written by that Tom DeLillo guy who writes very weird stuff. I haven't read his books, but I've seen a couple movies adapted from his books, and they have the same really weird energy. Like the dialogue is so unnatural, and it's in a way that's clearly intentional, right? So that's why you can kind of get on the movie's wavelength ever so slowly. The dialogue is so bizarre in this movie, but not quite in a way where it's like off-kilter in an eerie way. It's not like that. Some of it is weird enough to be kind of funny, like a darkly comic, like an absurdist sort of way. But a lot of it isn't. A lot of it like comes up just short of being, it's like not quite exaggerated enough to be funny. Some lines get there. The world building in this one, I feel like doesn't quite work. It's a movie that mostly takes place in the back of a limo, but he does leave the limo on occasion. And it's like the world is constantly changing outside the limo. There's like protests happening and like the city's kind of decaying and chaos is happening outside the limo. There's really interesting ideas there, but they're not like, they don't feel refined in a way that is like tangible. It feels like a lot of shit being thrown at the wall, and some of it sticks, but a lot of it doesn't really. I didn't hate it. I found it engaging enough. I don't think it really succeeds in what it's going for, however. I think it's a D. I know a lot of people would give it like an F. There's lots of like 1-star, half-star reviews for this movie because it is very weird, and like I said, it doesn't really pull off what it's going for, I don't think. But I don't think it's bad either. Okay, next up is Stereo. This is early Cronenberg. I think this is one of his like student films, like student short films. It's not good. It has this thing that is also a problem in Crimes of the Future, where the sound design is just completely lacking. There's basically no sound design. There's very little like audio. And the movie's called Stereo. I guess the idea is that like, I don't know, some people kind of posit that you're supposed to just like put on music and have the music played while the movie's happening, but I don't don't buy that. I kind of don't think that was the intent. I think the intent was, or not even intent, I think there was no intent. I think it was just a drawback. I think I read something about like the camera was too loud, so they couldn't use any of the recordings. Like they recorded audio, and it was just the camera was real loud. It was like a shitty, cheapo student film camera, and it just ruined all their audio. And they did ADR for some of the dialogue, not even all of the dialogue. And there's no like Foley, there's no like footsteps, like all the Foley you would expect, even just like room tone. Like it's just dead silent in between the dialogue. It's real awkward, but also like the narrative isn't interesting. There are like little flashes, not even flashes. Flashes is too big a word. There's little hints of what Cronenberg would go on to achieve, like his little fixations and stuff, his like bigger ideas. But it very much feels like he didn't know how to package them within a narrative yet. Stereo is not good. It's an E. It's only for the hardest core Cronenberg completionists. Okay, next up, Maps to the Stars. This was the last one that I had left to watch before doing my Cronenberg tier list. It ended up not being the last one that I watched because I actually went and rewatched this next one, eXistenZ, after, because Maps to the Stars just left such a gross taste in my mouth. This one's not good. It's on a similar wavelength as Cosmopolis, where things are just kind of weird. It's intentional but not effective in what it's going for. The off-kilterness is definitely intended, and it definitely has things to say. Some of the things it's trying to say kind of come across. Other things get very muddled. And then other things it say is just kind of like, well, yeah, everyone knows that. Like, it's not saying incisive, interesting things. It's just saying kind of, okay, yeah, Hollywood's fake. We get it, you know. It doesn't help that some of the dialogue in this is absolutely terrible. The performances are, again, he's going for that kind of off-kilter thing that he was doing in Cosmopolis, kind of in the way that, like, The Lobster and Killing of the Sacred Deer, you know, those Yorgos Lanthimos movies, have that off-kilter dialogue where, like, it's intentionally a little stilted and not supernatural. It works better in those movies than it works here. But, yeah, the performances are kind of all over the place. Everyone kind of, like, does what is asked of them except for the kid, the, like, child actor who's, like, a teenager. He is just awful. It doesn't help that the dialogue is so bad. Like, he's being asked to deliver like terrible, unnatural dialogue, but he's just not a good actor either. I mean, this is like his only. I think he completely stopped acting after this, and I don't know. I don't want to be too harsh because he's young, but like he's just not good. And he is like one of the main characters. He's like one of the three leads. Like, he's a bigger role than Pattinson in this, but also like just the story is not good. The character. It constantly feels like it's about to get really interesting, and it just doesn't get there. I think it might be an E, honestly. I could be generous and give it a D. It feels like if the script had another draft and a couple of the creative decisions were tweaked, like if there was someone saying, maybe don't do that, Cronenberg, like maybe don't do the CGI fire that looks horrible. Maybe don't cast this teenager who can't act. If there's, if he had that counterbalancing, I think he could have got up to a D with it, because it's still just like a flawed premise, I think. But it's an E in execution. Okay, next up is eXistenZ. eXistenZ is the last one I watched before making this tier list, but it was a rewatch. My original watch of eXistenZ, I think it was the first Cronenberg movie I had seen, but it was before I knew who Cronenberg was. I watched it back in high school. I was like a freshman in high school. I wasn't aware of the Cronenberg style and all that. And I didn't remember too much of it because it had been so long. I remembered not liking it all that much. I remember thinking the gristle gun was extremely cool, really interesting and unique. And I didn't remember liking much else about the movie. I specifically remembered really disliking Jude Law's performance in it. And the thing is, on my rewatch, that was consistent. I still don't like his performance. I don't like what Jude Law is doing in this. The thing with Jude Law is I feel like he's so hit or miss. He has given performances that I've liked quite a bit, but he's given a lot of performances where I'm just like, I don't like what you're doing, Law, unfortunately. I think it comes down to the accent, partly. I don't think that's fully it. He's definitely making some choices that make sense for the character. I get what he's doing on a performance level. I don't really like it. It takes me out of the movie. But it does kind of add up, so to speak. So it's intentional, just like how the weirdness in Cosmopolis is intentional. But he feels out of place amongst the rest of the cast, who mostly do a really good job. Willem Dafoe is great, as always. Willem Dafoe is always fun. But so he's really good. Jennifer Jason Leigh is good. She's solid in this. But Jude Law, he just sticks out like a sore thumb. I don't like his performance in it. But yeah, I think part of it's the accent. When he's allowed to act just in his British accent, his natural accent, he's usually better. When he tries to do the phony American accent, the whole, not only is the accent not convincing, Like you can tell he's not American. But again, that kind of works for this character, honestly, not to like get too deep into it, but it kind of works for the character. But I think it holds back his whole performance because he's like busy thinking about that, and he's like not as in the moment, you know. But overall, however, I enjoyed eXistenZ a whole lot more on rewatch. I think it's a very fun movie. It's very bizarre in like that classic Cronenberg way. I love all the design elements of the game, like how the game pod is that fleshy, like gross thing with the tentacles and the way it like jacks into people and stuff. That's all great. That's like quintessential Cronenberg right there. I think it's a B. The story gets a little convoluted, but in a way that is fun, in a way that feels like it doesn't take itself super seriously. And the world building's a lot of fun. Yeah, great gore, great like body horror elements when it rears its head. Yeah. It's a good time. I liked it a whole lot more in rewatch. My first watch was probably more of like a D when I saw it back in high school, and I wasn't like hip to the jive on what Cronenberg was throwing down. Okay, next up is M. Butterfly, aka Madame Butterfly. This one, real fucking hard to find. Spider and Madame Butterfly, and Crash to an extent, but Crash got a Criterion release recently, and now it's easier to find than it used to be. So really, Spider, M. Butterfly, and Naked Lunch, those three are so hard to find sometimes. They're like not streaming anywhere ever. They're on none of the streaming services. You can't even like rent it on like a movie rental thing. The DVDs are hard to find. It's like hard to track those ones down. But they're all worth watching. M. Butterfly, I really like this one. It kind of came and went, and people didn't seem to like it. Lots of like not great reviews for it. And I get why, I suppose. I feel like people misinterpret this movie. I saw a lot of people saying like they didn't believe it because they were like, oh, how could Jeremy Irons not notice? Like, what is he, stupid? I don't think that's the point. I think he did know. I think he knew the whole time. I don't think it's meant to be like a twist in that way. To me, M. Butterfly is like the good version of The Crying Game. It's like the positive way, like in terms of like trans representation. I think it's like the good way to actually do that, or just like general like, yeah, I actually really like and appreciate what this movie is doing in terms of its like messaging. I think it's actually really strong. You could read it in an incorrect way, but I feel like it's like a culmination of a lot of the like sexual identity stuff that Cronenberg has explored in a lot of his movies. I think it works really well. I think you just have to like read the film in the way that it is meant to be read. And it is a movie that's like open to interpretation enough that you could take a different message away from it, like a completely different message than I got from it. I really like the message I got from it. And I also think it's beautiful. There's lots of really gorgeous shots in this film. I think the plotting is like real strong in this one. Like it's got twists and turns that really work. And it's not a big twist in the way that people like think it is. It's twisting in other ways. I think people see something and they go, oh, it doesn't work as a twist, or it's how would it work logically? And I think that's not the point. That's not what the movie's going for. And those aren't the twists I'm talking about. That's not a twist like at all, really. It just isn't. Which I appreciate because I don't like that kind of thing being like a twist. I think it just really works on a character level, on a plotting level, and on a like cinematography level. It feels like an Oscar-y kind of movie. Like it has that prestige factor for it, but I think it just missed people. I think it didn't connect with people. I think people weren't ready for like this gay of a story at the time when they went into it. I think it's really good though. It's one of those movies that I really enjoyed while watching it, and it has kind of continued to grow in my recollection of it as well. And I love when that happens. Like sometimes that happens, a movie you enjoyed, and then you grow fonder for it over time. The more you think about it, the more it gestates. And it's definitely one of those as well, even though I enjoyed it right away too. I think it's an A. I think it's one of his underrated movies. I really like it. Okay, next up is The Fly. The Fly is the first one that I can emphatic? The Fly is his first movie that I can emphatically give an S tier. No hesitation, no doubt. It's just fucking good. It's real fucking good. Some of the best gore, body horror, practical effects you will ever see. It's also a great example of a remake completely blowing the original out of the water. You forget that the original like even existed. The original is just an old cheesy B movie with Vincent Price, turning into a real dumb looking fly man. Like the original is just goofy. It's okay, but it's not like any kind of like classic that you gotta go back and see. This one is the fucking classic. It's a great remake because it only takes the core of the original movie, which is like just an interesting little premise. It throws the rest out the window, and it takes that premise and executes it so brilliantly. Jeff Goldblum is phenomenal in this role. He's just perfect casting. He somehow nails the like creepy insect-like side of the character and the like genuinely like suave and seductive side of the character too. Cronenberg gets all of his little fixations in there. It's just wonderful. It's so good. And we got his two heavy hitters in a row. Videodrome is the other S tier. I don't even know if I could pick a favorite between these two. They're both so good. I think I might actually go Videodrome out of these two if I had to choose, because I just love like the like snuff film commentary. The handgun that shoots like cancer bullets is so inventive. Videodrome is one of like the wildest screenplays to ever be executed at this high a level with like a big budget and fantastic special effects. It's just a wild, bizarre, unhinged screenplay that is so creative and so outside the box at every turn. It doesn't take any easy choices, but also it's like brilliant on a thematic level. It's so good. And it's like creepy and grotesque in the exact right ways. I love it. Okay, next up is Shivers. Shivers is early Cronenberg again. It's kind of his first movie that feels like a real movie because I'll get to Crimes of the Future next, but Crimes of the Future kind of doesn't even feel like a movie. It's like a weird student film, Crimes of the Future. So Shivers is like kind of early Cronenberg. It definitely feels like it. It feels like, oh, this guy will be a great director one day, but he's not yet. You know what I mean? Very, very much feels like he's finding his footing. There's some cool stuff there. It feels very Cronenbergian already. It's got a little bit of that body horror. It's got a little bit of that grotesquerie. It's got a whole lot of the like weird sexual stuff that Cronenberg's always so good about. Like the old man who talks about pushing around the parasite lumps in his girlfriend's stomach and how he thinks that's sexy. That's so Cronenberg right there. It's so quintessential Cronenberg. The movie's not great though. It's very rough around the edges. It's very messy. I think it's a C though. I do enjoy it more than these. Now it's a much rougher film than either of these two. Like these two are more refined and polished, and they just kind of like don't nail what they're going for. Shivers is a lot more fun and more engaging. It has more like Scanners definitely has the most memorable moments, the big scanner fight and the head explosion. But Shivers is more like overall memorable. In between, everything else in Scanners is like very forgettable. Shivers has lots of like little memorable stuff. It's not great, it's very flawed. It's definitely the weakest of this collection here, but I like it quite a bit more than these two, so I'm gonna give it the C. Okay, and then Crimes of the Future, like I've alluded to already, doesn't really feel like a full movie. It's very much on par with Stereo. I'm gonna pop it right down an E. It's very flawed, and it's nothing like his new Crimes of the Future. Don't go and thinking, oh, it's his like blueprint for that. It isn't. For Cronenberg completionists only, I would say. And I would also say more than these two. Like it's a more interesting watch for Cronenberg fans than these other two, I would say, but it's not a good time really. Okay, next up we'll grab Crash. Crash used to be hard to find. It's now in the Criterion Collection, and that has made it a whole lot more accessible, which is good because Crash is fucking great. It's one of those movies like Videodrome. I would say even more than Videodrome, honestly, where it feels like, how the hell did this get made at such a level with like a big name cast? Like there's big actors in it, like James Spader. He's not like I guess he's still a big deal. He's on that Blacklist show. If that's still going on, I don't know. I never saw that. But he was like a huge star at the time. And this was such a gamble for him to, to star in. Because it's such like a sicko freak movie in the best way, which is how I would describe all of Cronenberg's best movies, is like sicko freak movies. In like a as like a term of endearment. Sicko freak, not as like an insult. Yeah. The premise of this one is it's about people who are sexually aroused by car accidents, which is just so interesting. It's so outside the box. And I love seeing like little subcultures dived into in such like a the best part about this is that Cronenberg treats it so earnestly. It's not like, oh, aren't these people weird? It's not that at all. It's about engrossing you in their point of view and like, oh, you get it, but like not fully. It's still, strange, but like he gets you on the wavelength. He treats it with such respect, takes it so seriously, and yeah, it's just really good. All the actors commit so thoroughly to it. I love that it gets full gay, where like a lot of movies would like not cross that line. This one crosses that line and gets full gay, which is always a good time. Elias Koteas is that guy's name. He is fantastic in this. That guy's like a character actor who you will for sure recognize, but you might not know his name. This is like a big role for him. He's still not the main character, but he is like, he's one of the main, he's not the protagonist, but he's one of the main characters. And he's so good in this. His character is so interesting, and just like all the production design works perfectly. Like the car accidents themselves, like all the twisted metal and the way Cronenberg like frames it in like an erotic context, even when it's just broken glass and like sharp metal, and like the leg brace with the scar under it. They gave the perfect car to Elias Koteas's character, where it's like big and heavy and like the shitty paint job, and it's just so perfectly fitting. I love this movie. I think it's an A for me, and honestly, I could see this one going up to an S on rewatch. Both of these, I think M. Butterfly is firmly an A, but both of these two I could see jumping up to an S. If you gave either of them an S, I think fair play. And honestly, I think like if I've only seen Crash the one time so far, I think when I rewatch it, I wouldn't be surprised if it gets the full S. Okay, next up is Rabid. This is Cronenberg's like big zombie movie, which Shivers kind of was too. He kind of has like two zombie movies, but they're both like not normal zombie movies. They're both like skewed. Rabid has like the sexual component that makes it very fitting for Cronenberg's filmography. Shivers kind of does too, but a little bit less so. Well, actually, I mean, yeah, it's pretty up front in Shivers too, but Rabid, it's very front and center. Rabid is really interesting because it's segmented in a way that's interesting. It's like as segmented as The Dead Zone, but in Rabid it works better, oddly enough, because it feels like more of a progression in like an exciting way, like, oh, I didn't know where this was going. Because the first act is very contained. It's all centralized to this one like plastic surgery clinic, and it feels very contained, and it feels like the whole movie could take place in that one location. But then it goes, oh no, she's leaving this clinic, and now we're just back in the real world. And that's the second act is there, and then the third act, it broadens its scope and gets massive. Still like low budget massive, but massive, where it's like we're seeing the spread of this like epidemic. It has some kind of parallels to like It Follows, in that it's like a sexually transmitted murder thing, except in this one they're more like zombies than whatever you would call the It Follows monster. Really interesting ideas at play here. Again, it feels like Cronenberg hasn't fully refined his style yet, but there's good stuff there. And there's some real good body horror, like the little stinger thingy that comes out her armpit. That's just great. That's classic Cronenberg right there. I think it's a strong C or a weak B. I'm not sure where I want to put it. I think I might go B. Now the thing is, I feel like all of these are technically better like made movies than Rabid. Like they're better directed technically. They have much higher production value. But if it was like, which one would you rather watch again? I would choose Rabid. I think it's more entertaining and more engaging. But it is pretty messy in some ways. So maybe it should still be a C. I think it is still a C, actually, but it's a strong C. Next up is Eastern Promises. This is another one of his Vigo joints, the follow-up to A History of Violence. They feel similar in a lot of ways, but also very distinctive. I like that Viggo Mortensen kind of became Cronenberg's muse in a way. Like, that's fun. I think they're a good pairing. Cronenberg's not a director who works with the same actors all that often. Like, he's lots of, like, one-and-done actors. Like, Jeff Goldblum, just in The Fly. Videodrome, just James Woods, the only time they work together. James Spader, only in Crash. You know, Ray Fiennes, only in Spider. But then you have Jeremy Irons in Dead Ringers and M. Butterfly. And then you have Vigo in Crimes of the Future, Dangerous Method, History of Violence, and Eastern Promises. They've worked together the most. And you have Robert Pattinson in Cosmopolis and Maps of the Stars. I think it's a little bit better than A History of Violence. History of Violence is like a full-on action thriller, whereas Eastern Promises, I don't think it's right to call that one an action thriller, maybe just like a crime thriller, but it does have one really big fight scene. And it's a really good fight scene. It's a really inventive, kind of unique fight scene that stands out. Vigo hangs dong in it, which is fun. Not a lot, but a little bit. A lot of actors wouldn't be down for a fight scene like that. And it's a really good fight scene. You feel like the desperation in it. Like, it does feel like these guys are fighting for their lives, not like they're carrying out some cool choreography. Like, there's nothing fun about it. It's like brutal and intense. It's a really good scene. It's definitely like the centerpiece of the movie and like the highlight of the movie, that big fight scene. But it's not like the bulk of it, obviously. It's one scene. There are other good scenes too, though. Like the tattooing stuff is interesting and pretty cool. Naomi Watts is pretty good in it. I wouldn't say it's one of her best performances, but she's pretty good. The story has some twists and turns, but it's not like... It's distinctive in some ways, but then it also falls into some kind of like general gangster movie cliches a little bit. I do think it's better than A History of Violence. But just like Shivers, I don't know if it's enough better to go to B. I think it's still a C. I love Cronenberg. I feel like he's much better than a C-tier filmmaker, but I do think that all of these are kind of C. Yeah. But they all have like elements that are better. Okay, and last up is Naked Lunch. Now, most of Cronenberg's movies are fucking weird, and somehow Naked Lunch, I think, is the weirdest of all of them. It's another one that's really hard to find, and I don't know why it's so hard to find, but it's worth tracking down if you can find it. This one took me a long time to see. It was a long time coming, and I finally watched it, and it's really good. It's really fucking weird. I think it might be his weirdest, but it's fascinating. It has some stuff in it that, like, maybe doesn't fully work. Some stuff that's kind of like, I don't know, almost too weird. Not too weird, but weird to the point where it's like kind of hard to follow and like track what's happening. There's a point where you have to just go, okay, I'm not going to try to follow it. I'm just going to like be along for the ride. And once you do that, it's got a great sense of style. There's some really cool like mergings of reality, the way that it blends into this like zone place and the real world and what's real and what isn't. Is any of it real? Very surreal, as you would probably guess from like the title and the poster and stuff. It might be his most surreal, because he usually plays the body horror pretty straight, even though it like surreal imagery but played straight. This one plays the surreal imagery in a more surreal way, a little more dreamy, some dream logic stuff. Yeah, it's got all the great grotesquerie. There's really cool like creature designs in this one. It's really fun. I think it's another A. Here we are in our David Cronenberg tier list. I am surprised by the C tier, by how crowded the C tier is. Because like always, I don't like think about where I'm going to rank these movies ahead of time. Even though if you were to take like the average, he would be a C tier filmmaker. Cronenberg is definitely not a C tier filmmaker. I think he's like an A tier filmmaker because he's got a lot of A's, and these two S's are so fucking strong. And then all of these movies have things about them that work really well. They're just held back a little bit in other areas. So yeah, that's where I rank Cronenberg's filmography. You can let me know where you'd rank his movies in the comments. Check out my other tier lists. Subscribe if you feel like it, or not. I really don't care. It's okay. Watch more or don't. Stick around or not. So long or see you later.